Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's so great to see you all this so early in the morning, and here to listen and discuss such a very important topic. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sabrina Stratton, and I am the chair of WCC, as well as Senior Vice President and Northeast Regional Director for Amalgamated Bank. At Women Creating Change, better known as WCC, our roots in civic engagement run deep. The organization was founded over 100 years ago by suffragists who wanted to make themselves heard on important civic issues. Notable early members included Eleanor Roosevelt and Frances Perkins. We honor that legacy at WCC today with our deep commitment to raising awareness about gender disparities, increasing civic engagement in education, and equipping New Yorkers with the necessary resources, tools, and connections to advance gender equity. We support women and gender-expansive individuals, not just to be advocates for themselves, but to collectively foster resilient communities, create lasting generational wealth. Let me say that again, create lasting generational wealth, enhance their quality of life, and build a more just and equitable society. Today, our new report, a collaboration between WCC and the New School, reveals a stark reality. Across nearly all professions, whether fast food, childcare, or in the fields of education, healthcare, finance, law, women consistently earn less than their male counterparts. This glaring disparity is especially pronounced for BIPOC women. Moreover, within the report, you will find a comprehensive set of recommendations spanning all sectors, offering a roadmap to how we can close the gender pay gap. So we're so thrilled today to be in this room, in this space with you, and to have such a wonderful group of dynamic leaders representing diverse backgrounds, including from the community space, nonprofit, government, and corporate sectors. Uniting as a collective force is paramount as we tackle the urgent challenge of bridging the pay gap and realizing true pay equity. Following the insights shared by our distinguished speakers and panelists, I trust you'll depart this event not only inspired by the unwavering commitment of our numerous leaders, advocates, numerous leaders and advocates, but to also feel invigorated to sustain this ongoing battle. Thank you again for being here today. We have such an incredible line of speakers, and I'm going to kind of scoot out of the way so that we can get this party started and get them all up here. I encourage you all to take a look at their bios and the event materials. Everyone should have a program and to learn more about their backgrounds and accomplishments. With that, I am honored to welcome Dr. Donna Shalala, interim president of the New School, here to give some remarks. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. Thanks to Amalgamated and of course to the WCC. I'm honored to be here today. This podium's a little high. You can tell I've only been here for a month. They don't have my stool yet. Actually, I was 3 inches taller before I went to Washington the first time. The Center for New York City Affairs is one of the co-hosts, is an applied economics think tank that orients its work towards research and policy that can improve the lives of all New Yorkers, particularly low-income and vulnerable ones. We're very proud of the center, and I'm delighted to be here on their behalf. I want to acknowledge, obviously, Sabrina and as the WCC chair, but also Sheena Wright, the first deputy mayor, has joined us, and I was delighted to meet her as well. And my longtime friend, Gail Brewer, who I've known since my first days at Hunter College, as well as Sharon Sewell Fairman, the president and CEO of the WCC. Let me just say a few words in terms of my own experience. I arrived in New York City in 1971, a freshly minted PhD from Syracuse, to teach at Baruch College. My first year at Baruch, because salaries were public, I noted that my starting salary was less than the other assistant professors that were hired at Baruch. So I went to my chairman and pointed that out. And he said two things to me. Number one, that I would never get tenure because I was a woman and they just didn't tenure women. This is 1971. And two, that I had embarrassed the department because I had published more than all the members of the department, including the senior members as well. So I went to the dean and he sort of reassured me, and I said, but it takes a departmental vote to recommend someone for tenure. And meanwhile, Wally Sayre at Columbia had been trying to recruit me, so I moved to Columbia to work with Wally, as well as Larry Kremen, the great historian of American education at Teachers College. And I stayed there for a number of years. I was not discriminated there in terms of pay or in terms of promotion or in terms of recommendations. And they had the same attitude that the Syracuse men did. There was only one tenured woman professor at Syracuse. But what the men at Syracuse decided was they couldn't recruit the guys, the best and most talented men in the country, to their PhD program because they were going to the Ivy Leagues. So understanding the beginnings of the American women's movement, they recruited women, a whole generation of women that went on to very distinguished careers. How insightful of them. But it meant that we had a network, not just with the women, but with the minorities as well, because they caught on to the fact that they could recruit just as bright students, but they may be of different colors as well as different genders. And so my career was actually launched by people that were strategically trying to extend their own reputations at the same time. Years later, when I became president of Hunter in the 1980s, I received a check. I think it was for something like $22. And it was from a legal settlement that the women at CUNY had, which was a landmark legal settlement for the discrimination because they had taken a deposition, I guess. I was sort of embarrassed because I was the president of Hunter, so I gave the money actually to women's studies at the graduate school. But that closing the pay gap has been something that I've worked on over the years. Every year, institutions I've been responsible for have analyzed the pay gap and tried to make adjustments. But it's now stalled because in the early years, we were talking about education and we were talking about pure discrimination and not paying attention and who was chairing departments and things like that. The reason the pay gap has stalled, I think that Claudia Golden has outlined very well, because she has said, what she has said is we've made enormous progress in terms of education. In medical schools, in law schools, in business schools. I was on the board of the New York Stock Exchange, and once the men on the stock exchange daughters got MBAs and went to the floor, they cleaned up the floor. And so we made enormous strides because of education, but that has stalled, and stalled in part for a very complicated reason, and it makes our work in pay equity much more complicated because it has a lot to do with women's lives. And Claudia Golden has called it greedy work And she's described it this way: jobs that pay disproportionately more per hour when someone works longer hours or has less control over those hours. And women naturally need more flex time because of their variety of responsibilities. So that while we have focused, particularly in New York, on low wage earners, particularly in the social services, people that work in nursing homes, and unions have been very helpful in that regard. In fact, I think most of the gains have been because of government policy, but really because of unions pushing for better pay for relatively low-income workers. We still have this problem of basically women have different lives. And if they interrupt their careers for a period of time, they lose years and pay over that period of time. And getting back into the workforce or introducing flex pay. I know a lot of my friends who were very hesitant about flex pay because they thought they were literally going to lose time in their careers. And so what you're looking at is a much more complicated, challenging issue. And it's an issue that requires a level of sophistication, the kind of analysis that our center does. It requires government intervention, but it also requires private sector intervention. Bill Clinton taught me something very important that I've never forgotten. And he said, to make policy, you had to understand people's lives. That is actually the story of pay equity. And that's the message I give you today. Thank you very much. And my colleagues are delighted to welcome you to the new school.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shalala. We really appreciated those remarks, and a lot of things that were mentioned still true to this day. And I want to especially point out the report and the fact that there are a lot of actionable items that can be taken and spelled out in the report. So really appreciate your remarks. I'm very excited to now bring to the podium Sheena Wright, First Deputy Mayor for the City of New York. Thank you so much, Sheena.
Thank you so much. We definitely need a little step here for all the short women, but thank you so much, Dr. Yes, okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Shalala, for your leadership over the decades and decades on so many issues that are so important to us. Very grateful to be here and very excited that the Women's Center, Women Creating Change, and the New School have joined forces. This is a really important report, and I just want to follow up. Dr. Shalala, I think, set the tone. I feel like this is going to be a little bit of a testimony session, where, as you said, in order to make policy, you have to understand people's lives. And as a woman, certainly leader in my own career trajectory, I think I might have been born just as you were talking about that 1971 experience. So this is the next phase. Appreciating that, we've all been personally impacted. I was just at the Columbia Law School, my alma mater, who just formed a women's group, and recalling and recounting, because there was a question about, well, how do you negotiate and advocate for yourself in terms of pay? And I told my own cautionary tale, how when I was moving from leading one nonprofit organization to another, I was at a nonprofit organization I was leaving, the salary was much lower that I had than the job that I was taking. And because at the time, we did not have the legislation in place that said you cannot take that into account in setting the salary, my salary going into this new job that had only been held by men. I was the first woman to lead this organization in its 80 some odd year history. That salary was probably 35% lower what was being offered to me than the man that was in the seat. Not only the man that was in the seat, but all the men that had been in the seat for the past 18 years. And I didn't know enough. And I took that job and was there for 10 years. And by the time I left, I was still making less than the man before the man that was in the seat 18 years before me. So certainly it is real. And as the first deputy mayor and the first Black first deputy mayor in the city's history, which is also an interesting fact, we bring our lived experiences to these places for a reason, right? And so when I see the report that says that white women make 86 cents on the dollar of white men, Asian women 72 cents, Black women 57 cents, and Hispanic women 54 cents. That's real, right? Those are not just numbers on the page. They are a reflection of the experiences that when I look across the room, I see Rosemont Pierre and the great work at the New School, and Jennifer Jones Austin and her leadership, and Michelle Jackson at HSC, and on and on. That's real, right? That's real. That impacts us in so many ways. So I'm excited to be in an administration that has 5 powerful women as deputy mayors in the city of New York. The first time we've had that level of diversity, gender diversity. So funny. Some people have said, "Oh my gosh, is that like too many women?" And I'm like, "Did we say it was too many men? I don't know." I don't know if anybody was like, "Is that too many men in the room?" Very strange. But to be in the seats that we're in, we come with our lived experience, and we understand what the charge is. And this report helps us identify what are some of the very specific interventions and things that we need to do collectively. The city of New York, when we talk about pay equity, it's the largest employer by 5x, right? We have 300,000 employees. Actually, a big percentage of them are women. We are 58% female. And we do have pay disparity in the city. We have established a pay equity cabinet to address race and gender pay disparities across city workers. And we are focused on moving the needle and closing the gap. We've just released an RFP to really understand exactly what that disparity is and what we need to do in order to close the gap. We know there's a gap. We're clear about that. And we've also instituted other strategies like structured interviewing and unconscious bias training for managers, and prohibiting using a person's salary history when making decisions about job offers. And happy that there's been legislation that's been put in place around that, as well as pay transparency and all of those policies that are going to help to make a difference. And we'll continue to advocate and push for that. There also has recently been established a Marshall Plan for moms. As Dr. Shalala said, it's not just about whether or not you're going to make the same as someone else. It's about all of those other things that impact your ability for your career progression. And we know that, as you said, women's lives are different. There's more work that we do in a day that are taking care of our families and all the things that we do. So we need to make sure that we're accounting for that as well. And so we're also excited that we are looking at things like paid family leave, which in the city is not good, paid parental leave, childcare leave, and also looking at the nonprofit sector, where mostly women of color, Black and brown women, are experiencing some of the largest pay inequities in the city. And so we need to really partner on this Certainly with the research and the data and the advocacy and the policies and the practice. And what we know, as you said, Dr. Shalala, is you talked about your trajectory, and I know our Councilwoman Brewer has a storied history as well. It's not going to happen overnight, as much as we would like it to. But we have to just be dogged and relentless and continue to push and push and push until we get to where we need to be as a city, as a country, and certainly there's much work to do in the world. So thank you for this report. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your leadership. I'm very much looking forward to continuing the road ahead.
Thank you so much, First Deputy Mayor Wright. Many of us have benefited from the pay transparency work, and as well as the work that has been done on pay inequities, and so we sincerely appreciate your work. I'm very excited to bring to the podium Councilwoman Gail Brewer for the next set of remarks.
Thank you very much. It is a huge honor to be here today to thank Women Creating Change, Women's City Club, because I'm old, so I remember it being called that, and the great Center for New York City Affairs at the New School, and Sharon Sewell-Fairman, and of course your wonderful Sabrina Stratton. I must admit, I'm in awe that Donna Shalala is here. Give her another round of applause. Congresswoman also, so I call her Honorable Doctor. So I think the state and the city of New York have been leaders in advancing all these policies that do promote salary parity and support women in the workplace. Obviously, the pay transparency in hiring, which I think was the city council law by Helen Rosenthal, my predecessor, and banning employers from asking about the history and expectation, extremely important. Enacting paid family leave, paid sick days. I did that bill. De Blasio took credit. I did the work. Pregnancy, he improved it a little, but he didn't go through 5 years of hell trying to get it passed. Pregnancy discrimination prevention, lactation laws, but there are, as you know, so many persistent pay disparities that the city and state need to do more, and we heard about that, and the report makes it so clear. Male-dominated industries tend to have higher wages, as we know, than industries made up of female workers. The financial activity sector has the widest gender pay gap in New York at 71.2%. Female median earnings are higher than their male counterparts only in construction. That's interesting, at 104.8%. While women make up only 21.4% of the construction industry workforce, they occupy professional management roles or other sales office roles. That's what increases. It's often architecture, and when you have the MB, WBE, sometimes you have white women taking over from the M part. So that's probably where that number comes from, and that's another whole story. High unionization rates may also play a role in better pay equality in the construction industry. Research has shown that unionized women make an average of 23% more than non-union women, and like everyone in this room, I'm a huge supporter of unions in this town. According to the Institute for Women's Policy Research, New York State has the highest share of women workers covered by a union contract, something to be very proud of. The transparency and equality provided by collective bargaining and union contracts lead to greater pay equity. Unionized women are also more likely to have paid leave, stronger employee-sponsored benefits, and protections against discrimination and sexual harassment in the workplace. That is so true. I have to say, I often thank non-traditional employment for women for all the work they've done for women in construction. Women are underrepresented, believe it or not, in the legal field and earn not as much as their male peers earn, no surprise. The legal field requires workers to work long and inflexible hours, which poses a challenge since many women tend to be responsible, as we all know, for family obligations. The healthcare practitioner field, conversely, is predominantly comprised of women, but it has a wider wage gap, as you can imagine. So I do want to mention on the legal field, something that I'll never forget. I was in the council when Gifford Miller was the head of it in terms of being a speaker. And I remember his wife, Pamela Miller, very well educated. This is not something that impacts Black or brown women. She was an Ivy League graduate, law school and undergrad. And I remember she was at a law firm. She was taking family leave to determine how she could raise her kids. She was in a law firm. And this was this was 2003. She was the first woman in the city of New York, and maybe in the country, to be able to get partner as a result of part-time work. And that wasn't so long ago. So this is where we have a long way to go. A survey by A Better Balance and Community Service Society found that 42% of low-income women in New York City's paid workforce have less than $500 in emergency savings, compared to only 90% of their moderate to higher income counterparts. 43% of low-income women in New York City's paid labor force are worried all or most of the time about having enough income to pay the bills. I do want to have a shout out for these two organizations, A Better Balance and CSS, because so many of the bills in this country that help working families and working women have been initiated by A Better Balance and CSS. New York City's women's labor force participation rate, defined as the share of all women aged 16 years and up who are either employed or unemployed or actively looking for work, is about 60%, a full 10% points lower than that of men. No surprise to you, one impediment that prevents women from fully participating in labor market is childcare. Irrespective of the age of the child, women who are heads of households with children are less likely to be in the labor force relative to their male counterparts and their female counterparts in married couple households. Whole issue of childcare is complicated. De Blasio had his issues. I served with him in the city council. I know him very well, but he did put 3K for all into our city. And I have to say, applications are due for January 10th, 2024. I hope every 3-year-old applies, but there aren't as many slots. We need to do much more about saying 3K is important for everybody. I do want to just talk for a minute about what I call paid sick times, also known as Earned Sick Time Act. And just to give you an example of what we have to go through, it was passed in 2013, and then it got good amendments. It talks about guaranteeing paid time off for 3.3 million private sector workers in New York, including 1.2 at the time who had no access to paid sick time before. And thank goodness it passed, because during the pandemic, it helped a lot of people. It gave us the opportunity as a country to go statewide. 16 laws were passed in other states as a result, I think, of our effort. Obviously, it became much more important during the pandemic. And now in 2023, we have some issues in the sense that it doesn't get enough education. So we just passed a bill saying we need a public education campaign on what we call Earned Sick Time Act. All these laws that get passed, A, they have to be implemented, B, you have to have the staff to do it, and 3, you have to educate and keep changing and tweaking the laws. They're not ones that just stay as they are. So we just are about to pass, I hope, an amendment that would add a right to file a private civil action for violations of the law, because we have to be sure that everything is implemented. And not everybody likes that, but I think it's important. I just want to mention, when I was borough president, I did add caregivers to the city's anti-discrimination law. So many of us have the situation where we're taking care of parents, taking care of children, and we need to make sure that if you are doing that, you don't, for instance, be not allowed to get a promotion or other kinds of discrimination. So just so you know, we're working on that, and it needs to have tweaking even that to the law. I also passed a Fair Chance Act, which removes criminal history questions from initial employment applications. This is a big deal for men and for women, but it means that those who are applying for a job cannot be asked, what is your criminal history? If you get the job and you're offered the job, you can be asked that. And also, we have passed the salary transparency law in the city council. As we know, we heard that earlier from the first deputy mayor, incredibly important to make an easier pathway for communities to gain employment. Again, it has to be implemented. It has to be make sure that it actually is happening. And then the city council also just passed a diversity of the fire department firefighters, that they have to be more recruitment and retention policies to support women and people of color. And then there are a whole bunch of childcare bills that have been passed, both with the mayor, some of his efforts, and certainly with the city council. And we heard earlier about the Marshall Plan for Moms. I think that study is due November 11th, really, really soon. Despite all these efforts, and there's lots of efforts in terms of childcare, making sure that we have portals, making sure that we have advisory groups, making sure that we coordinate with directories of childcare programs. It's such a big city, you know. As I say often, we're bigger than half the countries in the world. So you have to keep making sure that people know what information is out there. But still, one of the problems is just pay parity between the childcare programs, which are often run by nonprofits, and the Department of Education. I was in a childcare center the other day, 2 empty rooms because they cannot find a teacher to go in this nonprofit because the salaries are too low. And they go running right to the DOE, understandably, because the early education salaries are higher. You're gonna have programs, you gotta pay people, you're gonna make sure primarily women of color who are gonna be in those classrooms with the same qualifications as DOE. Gotta pay them the same, pay parity. I just want to mention something that has come to my attention in terms of childcare. Department of Correction, in the paper every day for whatever, but believe it or not, half of the correction workers at Rikers are women. And one of the reasons that they're out is because they have no childcare. They come from different parts of the state. They are not all New Yorkers, you don't have to be. And they need childcare. So I'm just letting you know, it's on my bucket list to try to get something, a childcare center near, not on Rikers, obviously, but near Rikers, so that they could not miss work because of childcare needs, something that we should all be looking for. Just finally, I have to chair the hearing this afternoon, and just to give you a sense of how challenging these problems are, particularly for women, but for all of us. In terms of cash assistance, before the pandemic, it was X. It is now 51% more people are getting cash assistance. And now we're talking, one in 500,000 people, many more, 51%, that's than what existed pre-pandemic. In terms of SNAP, also known as food stamps, there are now 1.6 million people getting food stamps, which is 14% higher than what existed pre-pandemic. We have a lot of work to do. It's an honor to read this report and to be here today and to know there are so many people working with us to make lives better for the women and our families in New York City. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Brewer. We appreciate you for significantly impacting the lives of women in the city. WCC has a new leader. You may not know it because of all the impact and work she has done over the past few months. It is my absolute honor and privilege to welcome Sharon Sewell-Ferriman, WCC's president and CEO.
Thank you, Sabrina. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see everyone. Thank you all for being here. I especially want to thank all those who gave a wonderful welcome remarks this morning. Our board chair, Sabrina Stratton, Dr. Donna Shalala, our first deputy mayor, Sheena Wright, thank you, and council member Gail Brewer. We're honored that you're all here with us to discuss this important topic. I also extend a warm welcome to all of you, whether you're here in the room or you're joining us virtually, thank you. I also want to say thank you to our board members in the room who've taken time out of their day job to be here with us again for this important topic. I see many friends in the room, but for those who do not know you, I am the president and CEO of Women Creating Change. I am 7 months on the job, but I took this job with the intention of going hard or not going at all, because our women deserve better. And so I'm here to highlight, to work with our partners in the room, and to be able to really raise awareness and move the needle on pay parity and other things that are significant barriers to women. As Sabrina mentioned, WCC's vision is rooted in our visionary principles of our trailblazing founders. Today, as we passionately pursue gender and racial equity, we recognize the power of civic engagement and activism as catalysts for progress in economic justice, health, reproductive rights, education, safety, and environmental justice. Our approach at WCC is characterized by inclusivity and intersectionality, underpinned by our steadfast commitment to equipping women and gender expansive individuals with the knowledge, resources, tools, and connections to advocate for themselves, foster stronger communities, and fortify our democracy. I think one of the things I've learned along this journey is that we don't know what we don't know. And it's important that we know and we're equipped with the tools to make a difference. Today, in partnership with Lena, James, Kristen, and the New School Center Affairs for New York City, the Center for New York City Affairs, I'm delighted to unveil our new report on the status of gender pay equity in New York City. While our esteemed colleagues have eloquently stressed the fact, it's worth repeating. True justice and equality cannot exist without gender pay equity. This isn't just an economic issue. It stands as a moral imperative. When women, especially women of color, earn less than their male counterpart for identical contributions, it sustains systemic discrimination, it perpetuates damaging stereotypes, and it stifles the collective potential of our great city. Despite these formidable challenges we face, my optimism for the future remains steadfast. It's fueled by the unwavering dedication of advocacy groups and individuals, many of whom are right here in this room. As I look around, Jennifer from FPWA, Bev from the Power Her New York, Michelle from the Human Service Council. I see Greg back there from the New York City Employment and Training Coalition, my former colleague Justin from WPTI, and Camille is here from the Women's Foundation. And we also have activists in the room, Cangela, who's going to tell her story a little later on. Together, we've achieved remarkable advancement on the path to gender equality. Nevertheless, this report will reveal that our journey is far from complete. As First Deputy Mayor Sheena Wright said, it's going to take some time, but it's important that we make progress. Regrettably, over the past 25 years, our progress has ground to a halt. And we're feeling it in our pocketbooks, aren't we? At WCC, we keenly recognize that the gender pay gap poses a substantial obstacle to full engagement in the democratic process. We understand that economic hurdles such as the gender pay gap amplify existing disparities based on race and gender. When we're juggling two jobs just to cover our basic expenses, the prospect of participating in our local community board or even casting a ballot on election day becomes extraordinarily daunting for many women. In essence, what's equitable pay? Without equitable pay, the capacity to make our voice heard in our community and drive change is severely constrained. This report is the first installment in a series focused on overcoming the economic barriers that hinder civic participation. With the financial support from the Nina Untermeyer Fund and the Robin Hood Foundation, WCC is committed to charting a course towards transformative progress. The insights and directives presented within will serve as a guiding path forward towards the realization of pay equity in New York City. I'm almost done. I know everyone in this room is deeply committed to the fight for fair pay, higher wages, robust benefits, and more family supportive policies that will empower women by extension. I was just at a One Fair Wage a rally. They just released a survey. Women who worked in restaurants during the pandemic were not eligible for unemployment insurance. That has got to change. New York City is the last of 8 great cities who are still paying sub-minimum wage to restaurant workers. That has got to change. It is my honor to be with you all today for this vital conversation. Collectively, we possess the potential to ignite transformative change, not only within New York City, but also a model for progress beyond our borders. We can continue to persist in our journey towards a brighter future where gender pay equity isn't just an aspiration, but an everyday reality that enriches us all. And with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Lena Moe from the New School, to walk you through the report and its findings. Thank you all for your partnership.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here this morning. My name is Lena Moe, and I'm an economic and policy analyst at the Center for New York City Affairs at the New School, and I'm the lead author of the report that we're talking about today, which was the product of so much support and collaboration from many people in this room. And I'd especially like to thank Seth Moncrief and Anita Mayhew for all their work putting together this special event this morning. I'm going to see if the clicker works. Yeah. Is there another mechanism for advancing the slides up here? Ah, there we go. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so this weekend I finally saw Barbie with my little niece, and maybe some of you saw it with your children or your friends. And at the most rousing moment in the movie, America Ferrera lays out the contradictions that plague being a woman in the United States today. It's impossible, she says, to rise to all the expectations, social, emotional, financial. There are impossibly high standards set for women. But today we're talking about a standard that can and must be reached. Equal pay for equal work, and women supportive and family supportive policies that make that possible. So here's the brief agenda for my talk. We'll start with an introduction and what is the gender pay gap before turning to the major drivers of gender pay inequity and the factors that set New York City apart from the US overall. We'll then look at how the gender pay gap affects all women, but not all women equally, with women of color seeing a particularly high burden of pay inequity. And finally, we'll look at the challenges and opportunities of the COVID era and ask, how can we continue to build on the important legislative work done by women's advocates and women's groups, and where do we go from here? When the Equal Pay Law was passed in 1963, women workers in the US earned 59 cents for every dollar earned by a man. Today, that rate nationally has climbed to 87 cents for full-time women workers. In New York City, it's even higher at 90 cents. But over the past 25 years, little to no progress has been made. Why is that? First, how do you measure the gender wage gap? We use 2 basic measurements in this report, the gender earnings ratio and the gender pay gap. You calculate an earnings ratio by dividing women's median earnings by men's median earnings. The gender pay gap divides that difference by the benchmark of men's earnings. Both measurements of gender pay equity can be calculated in relation to all men or to certain groups. Here, we frequently use white men, the most socially and economically privileged group of workers, as a baseline for comparison. So in New York City, the earnings ratio for all women compared to all men is 90% or 90 cents on the dollar. But when comparing all women to white men, that ratio falls to 65%. I also want to note that while our data limit how much we can draw out about trends for LGBTQ people, research shows that the gender pay gap persists across sexual orientation and that gender nonconforming people face even higher economic barriers. So we expect that the policies outlined here will be important for LGBTQ people also. So what are the underlying causes that make the gender wage gap so persistent? Women experience a huge diversity of work and life circumstances, yet the gender pay gap persists across occupations, across education, across race and ethnicity, disability status, sexual orientation. 4 primary drivers can be identified. First, occupational segregation. This is an economic term for pointing out that men and women do not work equally in all the same industries and occupations. Instead, there are some jobs that are skewed toward men, like tech and finance, which are higher paid, and there are some jobs that are dominated by women, like education and care work, which are often lower paid. And as these two groups of jobs grow, male and female wages are driven further apart. Second, women typically do a lot more unpaid domestic work at home. This is often called the second shift. And the additional exhausting demands of domestic and care work often mean that women have less time to network, work overtime, go on work trips, or do additional training and education that could help them climb the career ladder. Third, the motherhood penalty. This refers to the greater care work that women do, particularly for young children, and the fact that this often leads mothers to cut down on hours or leave the workforce altogether. This is not just the result of social norms, but also a clear financial calculus that many families have to make. The gender pay dynamic feeds this because women earn less than men. It often makes more sense for families to have women leave their lower paid jobs. And finally, even when accounting for the occupation, the fewer hours worked, the likelihood of leaving the workforce, there is still some pay gap unaccounted for. And this is the result of direct discrimination. The intersectional effects of sex and race-based discrimination mean that women of color experience compounded, higher levels of structural and direct bias. So, with that background, let's look at what's happened over the past 25 years in gender pay equity. Here we see the US overall in blue, New York State in orange, and New York City in gray. There are also trend lines here which show that since 1997, the gender earnings ratio has slowly but gradually increased for the US from 81 to 87%, and New York State from 83 to 88%. But for New York City, which is higher than either throughout this period, there has been a stagnation. And the 3-year average is lower in 2022 at 90% than it was in 1997 at 92%. So New York City is higher overall, but has shown less progress, maybe even a little backsliding. This is comparing all women to all men, but what if we compare women to white men? Here we see women's median earnings as a percent of white men for full-time workers. There's a very different dynamic because white men have such high earnings in New York City compared to both women and to men of color. But the trends here are similar. The US and New York State show very gradual trajectories upward towards greater equality, and New York City has a slight decline from 69% in 1997 to 67% in 2022. So what's driving this difference? Very briefly, I also want to show this is the ratio of men of color to white men, which we see is lower in New York City, the gray line, than in the US and New York State overall. But back to why New York City is showing different gender pay equity trends than New York State and the US. In order to answer that, we focused on what kinds of jobs men and women have in New York City. We grouped jobs into 7 broad categories: blue-collar work, care work, education, high-wage management and professional workers, low-wage service and retail work, middle-wage professional jobs, and the public admin sector. Then we compared the city's economic landscape to the state. Compared to the state, the city has a higher concentration of care workers and high-wage jobs, and fewer blue-collar and education jobs, and a comparable portion of low-wage service and public sector jobs. So why does this matter? Because New York City has a higher percentage of some jobs than the state, and because women and men tend to be disproportionately represented in some fields compared to others, this is driving New York City's pay equity ratio on a different path than the state and the nation. In New York City, women make up 83% of the care work sector, which includes childcare, social assistance, and home health aides, some of the very lowest paid jobs. Also in New York City, men make up more than half of the high-wage tech, finance, and information jobs. Here are the median wages for care. Here you can see the median wages for care workers fall at the very bottom of the spectrum, $18 an hour for women and $22 an hour for men. Note that across all these industries, even in female-dominated fields, men make more money. Moreover, over the past 20 years, there has been rapid growth in these very low-paid, female-dominated jobs. In New York City, since 2003, the care work sector has grown by more than 1/3. I've given you an overview of the industry and occupation landscape, but now I want to show you how different groups of women fare by race and ethnicity and education level, and also how women do as they age. Pay inequities affect all women, but here you can see that the burden falls hardest on working women of color. Here we have the pay ratio of women to white men. White women to white men have a pay ratio of 87%, but Black women earn only 57 cents for every dollar a white man earns, and Hispanic or Latina women only 54 cents, and Asian women 72 cents. In an upcoming report, as Sharon mentioned, we hope to investigate the care work sector in particular to see whether the very low earnings of women of color who work as child care workers or home health aides are driving these ratios down. Moreover, if you look at the gender earnings ratio compared to white men as women age, the gender pay gap is wider for older women than it is for women just starting out in their working lives. And finally, earnings tend to increase with years of education, but gender pay inequity persists whether women have a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree. In fact, the pay gap for women with some college is 79%, while the pay gap for women with an advanced degree is lower at 77%. So where does this leave us? With women in New York City making less across every occupation and industry, across all ages and education levels, and in an economic landscape where low-paid, female-dominated jobs are growing, and where women workers of color are suffering particularly heavy burdens of pay inequity. In the COVID era, we saw glimpses of both challenges and opportunities. Here we can see an image of the Marshall Plan for Moms mentioned earlier, introduced in the New York City Council, that put women and policies that help women and families front and center in the economic recovery. During COVID, women who worked through the pandemic in healthcare and care work faced high risk. At the same time, school and nursing home closures put higher care burdens on women at home, and women left the workforce at higher rates. So that even if they returned later, which labor force participation has recovered, many missed gaining crucial years of professional experience during this era. But COVID also normalized remote and flexible work for some occupations that made it easier to juggle family responsibilities. Though this benefit did not extend to workers who have to be on site or in person, like the many retail workers, medical assistants, nevertheless, COVID catalyzed and re-energized a policy discussion around what women and families need. I'm going to leave that policy discussion to the panel that is coming next, but I will highlight that New York has been the scene of brave and bold women's advocates and policy groups who have helped make New York a leader in protecting women against salary history questions, being discriminated against for pregnancy, providing early childcare, and so on. However, we are in need of raising the pay for human services workers who are primarily women of color, and raising the wages of childcare workers, which are far too low. We need to restore the purchasing power of the minimum wage, which would disproportionately benefit women. And we need to enhance unemployment benefits. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that busy working women can engage in civic participation. And that will be the focus of a future collaboration between the Center and WCC. Thank you so much for your attention.
Lena, thanks so much for reviewing over those important points from the Gender Equity Report. Really quickly, before I bring the next person on the podium, I just wanted to really quickly thank WCC's past board members, past board of directors, and current board of directors who are in the room and who are listening in. Just wanted to send my gratitude for the support that you've given WCC over the years. Next, I'm excited to bring to the podium Cangela Moore. She is a gender equity activist and business agent at Teamsters Local 237, which we're a big fan of, so welcome.
Greetings. I'm excited to be here to tell my story and to really put a context in regards to gender pay discrimination. So my name is Cangela Moore, and I was a plaintiff in the largest class action pay discrimination lawsuit against the city of New York. Thanks to Teamsters Local 237 and President Gregory Floyd, this made an historic announcement on Women's Equality Day, 2014. And you think 2014, that's a long time ago, but yet we're still here talking about the same thing, right? So this was done in regards to compensating the 5,000 school safety agents with a settlement of $38 million. Therefore, I can tell you about pay discrimination firsthand. It's ugly, it's painful, and it should be considered a crime. I worked as a school safety agent over 29 years. I loved my job. I created a safe environment for the youth in our New York City public school system. Oftentimes that task was difficult, as you know, in our New York City public schools. However, I wanted to support the next generation of leaders that was worth every bit of hard work and dedication I had to give. At that time, school safety division was composed of 70% women of color, predominantly African American and Hispanic women that were heads of households. I cannot fathom that I chose this job, this career that I love, that was paying me less than my male counterparts. It infuriates, it saddens me at the same time to know that I was paid $7,000 a year less than my male counterpart in another agency. Think about this for a second. $7,000 less because of my gender. Can you imagine what you can do with $7,000? At that time, I was employed with the NYPD for over 22 years. Let's do the math. 7,000 times 22 years of service. Does anyone know how much that is? I do. That's $154,000. That equates to the amount of money I would have earned if pay discrimination was not alive and well. Add 150 school safety agents with the same amount of tenure as myself. That's $154,000 times 150 school safety agents. Does anyone know how much that is? Over $23 million. Can you imagine the trajectory shift on the quality of lives these earnings would have made on the lives of my fellow colleagues, school safety agents, majority African American and Hispanic women and their families? This is the crime. I want you to think about it. It's a crime. I had an elusive bank account I would never have access to, much like my coworkers and their families. This is my nightmare. Now imagine the reality of the impact of gender discrimination. Working long hours and overtime to compensate, to put food on the table, because actually there is no money, right? Sleep deprivation. We're not sleeping enough time to actually to be able to regenerate our bodies. Chronic health issues such as diabetes, hypertension, and the list continues. This is why this conversation is vital. We must continue to sound the alarm on paid gender discrimination. I think Women Creating Change, the New School Center for New York City Affairs, and the other organizations here today continuing to fight to ensure that women are not left behind like second-class citizens. I also thank Women Creating Change for the fellowship program that they have that I was a part of. It gave women like myself a voice and also the tools needed to affect change. I stand on the shoulders of strong women leaders that have paved the way for women like myself. Walmart employee, Betty Dukes, Goodyear employee, Lily Ledbetter, and we all know the legislation, right, that Obama passed? Yes. Billie Jean King, Venus and Serena Williams, Ruth Ella, and Patricia Ann White, my mother and my grandmother. Yes, these are our sheroes and our heroes, and the list continues. We must continue to fight until we no longer need advocacy, courts, and legislation for women to receive equal pay. Thank you.
I was so captivated by the speech. I forgot that I had to, I had to come up here. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And so without further ado, we are now ready for the panel discussion. I would like to welcome to the stage Marcela Herrera Avila, Jennifer Jones Austin, Camille, I'm sorry, I don't want to mispronounce your name, Emagwali, thank you so much, Lorraine Harriton, Michelle Jackson, and Beverly Newfield to begin the panel discussion.
Thank you. This has been so incredibly enlightening, and there's so much work to be done. We've talked about the research, we've talked about the data, we've heard the story, and I'm sitting here with people who are doing the work, and we want to talk about that and how do we start to create more, well, not start, continue to create more change when it comes to equal pay. So I'm going to open it up with one question that for any and all of you to respond. As we're seeing with the report, there's slower progress in New York City than there is state, and there's slower progress in New York City than there is state and nationwide in the last 20 years. So what factors should we focus on as we address the gap in earnings in New York City? And open to anyone.
I can't believe we're all being so shy.
I know, I'm gonna start calling on you then. Beth.
Okay. Well, one of the things that first of all, I want to thank Women Creating Change. I'll always say Women's City Club, I think, in my mind, but I want to thank you for this report. It's really an excellent overview of the data is so important if we want to find the proper solutions. We want to identify the problems, but also really create targeted solutions. So thank you for that, and obviously to the New School for all their work. The report talks about the fact that in New York City versus the rest of the country, we have such a high number of finance organizations, business organizations, and tech. Not tech is more in California, but still we have quite a few. And those jobs are predominantly male jobs, and men get paid more than women. They also have, it's not just the pay, it's the opportunity as well. So women are in the bottom half of the pay scale there. So I think that New York City is unique in that we have that, and it is a challenge to get the business community, that business community, to be more responsive.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I'm Lorraine Harrington. I'm with Catalyst, which is an organization that works, companies promote workplaces that work for women, and I really appreciate being part of this discussion. I do think the dynamics of New York are unique, and we just highlighted them. So some of the, we need to do a better job at building the skills for women so that they can participate and in these higher paid jobs. It's really unfortunate that there's gender segregation in this way, because more women are graduating from colleges. They're outnumbering the men. So we need to provide the skills for lower wage people who don't have college degrees, that are more skills based than diploma based, and we need to work together to give them that education. We need to open up those channels, and we need to really focus on the gender segregation that exists. Secondly, I think the other place that I think there's a real opportunity is in childcare. Everyone's talked about childcare and unpaid care responsibility of women are really a big issue. So I'm really grateful that New York City has invested in pre-K and the 3 and 4 year old program. That makes a real difference. But I have grandchildren that are in the city schools, and I have the parents of them that have to pay $20-25 an hour for caregiving. And then if you're making $30 an hour, you've got a big crunch. There's no way to really solve this problem unless we have public-private partnerships to address this. And unfortunately, in the United States in general, New York is probably ahead of that, but it is really a fundamental issue if we want to have women in the workplace. I also want to say that I think to the extent we start to change these norms, that there's more of a sharing of responsibility for caregiving at home, it will start to change those norms as well.
Yeah, and I would just add that on the flip side of how we participate in like high income earners and those kind of jobs, it's valuing the jobs that women do. Human services workers, there's 800,000 human services workers across the state of New York. Before Governor Hochul, they had not received a cost of living adjustment in 15 years. So their wages were not keeping pace. The city has made sparing investments here and there in the last 15 to 20 years, but it's not just driving people to those careers, it's valuing the fact that caregiving work, human services work is remarkably valuable. It's jobs that are not going to go overseas. They're jobs that are not going to become automated. As the population ages, as the boomers age, there will be an increase, and already is an increased need for those jobs. They are valuable jobs in communities. They require vast levels of education. They range from entry level to highly qualified and skilled, and we don't value them. We call it mission-driven work or God's work, which are not bad terms in and of themselves. We know what that means. It means volunteer-led. It means second income in the family. And these are quality jobs that are not leaving New York. But if we continue to undervalue them, we will see people leaving those jobs as we already are. And that leaves, I think generationally, to your point, that means we don't have childcare workers. It means your senior parents don't have a place to go while you go to work. So it has a kind of domino effect on the economy. And so I think that's also an important part of this.
That's really great that you added that, because I was actually going to ask you, Michelle, what you thought were some of the things that we could do to overcome the occupational segregation. I know you've worked on the Just Pay campaign and other things, and so I'd like you to expand on both.
Yeah, and with the occupational segregation is interesting because that's obviously not my level of expertise. I think, getting women into different types of jobs and not driving, the whole like history of driving men towards math jobs and women towards care jobs, not my area. But I would just say, again, it's the idea of valuing that nonprofit workers and human services workers make New York's economy work. Upstate, and sometimes there's only one or two childcare centers, things like that in the city. While we have a vast network, which makes us unique, people come to those jobs as children. Sometimes they form an attachment to that care center and stay throughout their lives, and it can inspire whole career paths. And we should be valuing that in terms of the economic impact that it has. And, the data has already shown, and this is also a New School report that I steal from all the time, is, the human services workforce is overwhelmingly women, 70%, overwhelmingly people of color, 75%. And they're the second lowest paid industry in New York after restaurant workers. And these are social workers, which require master's degrees. These are case managers who've been in the job. These are the people who care for seniors, who do home delivered meals, who help children in foster care and preventive services, help homeless shelters. And during COVID, I think we really saw the essential nature. And if we all remember this example I always give, the clapping at 7 p.m., the banging of the pots and pans, I don't think people were thinking of human services workers during that time. They were thinking of hospital workers, police, fire, et cetera. But human services workers were why those other essential workers could go to work. And they also risked and lost their lives keeping homeless shelters open, keeping childcare centers open, and delivering meals to others who couldn't leave their homes. So I think it's just about raising the profile and value of that work in the same way that we talk about tech and education and other types of work. And the Just Pay campaign, which I'll talk about more, is really about centering the fact that government is the predominant funder of human services wages at the city and state. Therefore, they're the setter of those wages. So I really appreciate the report's call out of not just the Just Pay campaign, but that government is wholly responsible for the poverty level wages that they pay human services workers.
Thank you for that. Jennifer, I want to hear a little bit from you. As we see with the report, there's a gap, but there really varies by background, by ethnicity, by race. And we know that Black and Latino workers, female workers are the ones that are mostly impacted with the gap. So I want to talk a little bit about intersectionality and how we can see the effect and this disparity and how to incorporate this understanding of the difference in the work that women of color tend to do and the pay gap and the discrimination, and how can we help move and close the gap in that level?
Okay.
Big question. Big question, no pressure.
Big question with a history,
Yeah.
a 400+ year history. What we're talking about while we're centering on inequity in gender pay, what we have to appreciate, and I think the report is tremendous, but we have to center on the structural underpinnings. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about here is structural economic deprivation. It is rooted in sexism and racism, mm-hmm. with sexism and racism being the two most effective tools for upholding economic inequity. We cannot begin to address this issue or overcome this issue with tactical responses. Only when we deal with structural economic deprivation and the whys are we going to begin to address and really overcome sustainably gender pay inequity. The best example I can provide for you, and I always center on this, is the experience of the Black woman in America. Mm-hmm. She is right now the most educated in the sense that her segment, the Black woman, is the most educated in our society. Most often she comes from a family that, because of centuries of discrimination, structural discrimination, systemic barriers, when she seeks to improve her family and her situation, she goes to college. She's told that college is going to help her improve her circumstances. Well, because of structural inequity in jobs and wages and home ownership, her family does not have equity in houses to help her pay for her education. So she takes out student loans She tries to better herself and get beyond a college bachelor's degree. She gets a graduate degree. And because of what has happened in all the years prior, teachers, guidance counselors telling her, you'll be best in jobs where you can serve and help your community, but those jobs don't pay. And why don't they pay? Because the people you're serving really aren't worthy and have been deemed unworthy of government supports and services from long before she even got on this earth. So she goes to school, she gets that graduate degree, and now she's saddled with student debt. And lo and behold, she takes a job in the nonprofit sector, in the government, and she's paid significantly less. Oh, and because of other structural and systemic barriers, very often, most often, she's raising children on her own. She's the primary breadwinner in nearly 70% of the household, sole breadwinner. And so what happens? 1 in 3 Black children grow up living in poverty compared to less than 1 in 10 white children. What happens by the time she reaches retirement? She is most likely to be poor and unable to take care of herself. The intersectionality, what we need to look at is the why. Because sexism and racism have proven the most effective tools for upholding an inequitable economic system. Occupation segregation is intentional. It's deliberate. It begins with 3-year-olds playing with dolls. And so if we're going to do something about this, we need to center at the root. How do we address structural economic deprivation?
Can we just give a big... Thank you.
These conversations, they burden me. They burden me deeply as a woman, as a Black woman, because we engage very often. We treat problems. We don't really cure them. We don't get to the root, the why. This system is by design. Why is it that white men, when we do these comparisons, they sit on top? It's by design. Why is it that with MWBE contracts in New York City, under 2% of city contract dollars went to MWBEs? And then when they went to MWBEs, over 70% were given to white and Asian women. It's by design. So until we deal with that, we're not going to get anywhere. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I really appreciate you calling it out and saying it as it is, because it is a structural issue that needs to be addressed. Question is, where do we start tackling and how do we start tackling this big, big undertaking? I know that we talked a little bit about policies with the report, and the report suggests some policies. Camille, I wanted to ask you a little bit about other programs and organizations that are doing work to address the gap, and also the role of philanthropy, because I do believe there's a role there.
So thank you for inviting me to this conversation, Women Creating Change. Really do appreciate you continuing to create opportunities for us to talk about this, and also for me to share space with all of these dynamic women here on this panel. One of the things that was connecting for me, even in that presentation of the data, was just the interconnectedness of the lives of women who earn low wages and higher wage women, right? And when we think about, for example, the motherhood penalty and women who need care and are seeking care from women who are being underpaid to provide care, there's just that connectedness that I think needs to be uplifted, and how there needs to be this synergy and connection in the work that's happening. What also I think stood out for me in the data that was present is even the other intersections of a woman's life that I want to uplift and name here. Here in New York City, we are a city of immigrants, and I think when we talk about the experience of women, we need to talk about the experience of immigrant women and how women are channeled into these certain jobs. because, for example, there may not be other jobs besides the care jobs, those 24-hour jobs where they're taking care of people with chronic illnesses, older adults, children, et cetera. I want to also name and uplift some of the data that was uplifted around age, right? What does it look like after leaving the workforce, coming back and still having to start essentially from scratch and making your way back up to a livable wage? And then finally, I also want to name disability. I think ableism is a big thing that we don't ever really uplift, but even in COVID, we've seen remarkable shifts and changes with remote work being an opportunity that opens up for women with disabilities. And so what we've been doing at the New York Women's Foundation is funding and supporting and investing in organizations that are prioritizing those communities in particular, because when we talk about where low-wage workers are coming from, the experiences that they have, it's thinking about all of those things together, right? And so we have, for example, funded organizations that are doing work to increase accessibility for women with disabilities, women and gender expansive people with disabilities. Also wanting to note uplifting gender identity as well, thinking about when we talk about gender expansive people and we're talking about women, we're also talking about trans women as well and their experience in the workplace. And the difficulty, for example, in finding jobs, keeping jobs, and being paid. We also are funding dynamic organizations, and for example, organizations here on this panel, like Power Her New York, these kinds of groups that are out here with networks connecting, not only here in New York City and New York State, around how to advocate and push for pay equity and pay wages in community. So there are a number of ways, I think, from an individual, community, and systemic level that philanthropy needs to be involved and invest. But just to be clear, that even within philanthropy, we have an underinvestment in women. We are 6% of all intentional investments around philanthropy focused on women. And even for women of color, it's less than 2%. So even focusing on this community as a population that funders need to be supporting, in addition to these issues in and of itself, is where philanthropy can play a role.
That's pretty eye-opening, less than 2%. Anyone want to add on organizations, programs, or how we can work together to make these systemic changes? Beverly, I'm looking at you,
Sure.
kind of.
I know. Thank you so much for rooting us, in the real causes. These are huge issues that we all are grappling with. And I think for Power New York, we were saying, what can we do to disrupt the effects of racism, sexism, ableism, right? And so the Equal Pay Campaign really started a long time ago, but I've been involved since 2007. And one of the things that we've tried to do is to lift up the issue, educate people, engage people, and also create political will. Because ultimately, I think we felt that concrete solutions would, or some of them at least, would come from political action, which is not easy to make happen, especially when the decision makers are those who are at the top of, the food chain, right? And that's why I want to remind everyone, before I forget, to vote. Because you think local elections don't count? Well, if it wasn't for the New York City Council, we would not have the salary history ban, which has now gone to so many states. If it wasn't for local elections, for local leaders standing up, listening to all of us and responding, we would not have the salary transparency bill. And that is the bill that requires that employers of 4 or more in New York City and now New York State, that you have to post salary ranges in all job listings, including on, in a bodega, on a sign. It has to say whatever the $20 an hour. So just to remember, it is all connected. And I think we were looking for, with Power New York, we were looking for concrete disruptors, and those two have been really significant. The report makes it very clear that women and people of color are being paid less. Mm-hmm. So how do you stop that? It keeps multiplying every time you go for a job. Though the salary history ban did change that. And then now with the salary transparency piece, you go in, you already know that you've been paid less, right? So you go in with lower expectations. But now you're seeing that that job pays from $42,000 to $58,000 a year. You weren't going to ask for that, but now you know that is exactly how much you should be in that range. And you may not have known that because you don't have networks, who can really share that information with you. So let's try to take away, I think we can't change everything, but we can give opportunity and we can disrupt, these extremely damaging policies and find solutions. And that's what the Equal Pay Campaign has been trying to do since 2007. Every Equal Pay Day, I don't know, I hope you'll all be with us this year, but we're on the steps of City Hall, and lifting up these issues. Or now we don't even have Equal Pay Day once a year. We have Equal Pay Day about 6 or 7 times a year because we're looking at each group. We're not just looking at all women collectively versus all men collectively. We're looking at what are the unique challenges for mothers. So we have a Mother's Equal Pay Day. And we're looking at what are the cultural issues that Latinas are experiencing in our communities, and that Black women are up against, which you so clearly, shared. So each group has its own problems, own reasons, and we have to find really targeted solutions. Otherwise, we'll keep talking and we'll be throwing a lot of darts, at the target. But we have to hit the target. And this is an opportunity we have right now, I believe, where people are listening. Many years ago, nobody talked about equal pay for equal work. Now we're talking about equal pay for substantially similar work. And now the international standard is equal pay for work of equal value. And gets at exactly what you were talking about. So this is a conversation that's gone from being very quiet to being very loud. And I just think that, this is our moment. This is our moment to push harder for better policies, push harder for businesses to look at what they're doing that are continuing these life-changing pay disparities. So there's a lot of things we can do, but I think it is our moment to talk about it and our moment to find and to push for these solutions.
If I may add, first let me just say I so much appreciate the work that you do, and it's been valuable for us at FPWA and others on the panel. I am hopeful that we are on the we're on the precipice of better informed policies and programs with the mandate now for New York City to annually calculate the true cost of living.
Right.
We are joined here by Jimmy Pan, who served as the General Counsel for the Racial Justice Commission, and I served as a commissioner and chair of that body. Derek Hamilton here at the New School, a national economist, also served on the commission. We determined that in addressing racial justice and inequity, that one of the most concrete and immediate things that we could do was to begin to measure the true cost of living here in New York City. And that is because currently, when we raise the wage at the city level and at the state level to $15, what's the basis for that? Right? When we raise it to 15 and we don't index it to inflation and it just sits there, but what is $15 an hour when annualized? It's $30,000. Who in New York can live off of $30,000 a year, right? We also know that in the federal government, the federal poverty measure determines eligibility for critical income supports, many of them, right? And so, and that federal poverty measure says that a family of 4 living anywhere in America needs just $30,000 to not be poor. Anywhere in America. We're not even talking about New York City. But we know with other measures that when they look at what it costs here, for a family of 3 living in what is deemed the most affordable borough, the Bronx, you need at least $85,000 to make ends meet. So I am hopeful that the now mandated, the charter mandated, the constitutionally mandated true cost of living measure will provide us with the critical data that is needed to understand what it costs to live here, so that when we begin to talk about pay, and pay equity, we have some real data to support what that actually looks like, right? And frankly, what policies, this is me, sometimes I'm on a different side than my own team at FPWA, that go beyond basic income supports,
Yes.
that go beyond like treatment of the problem and really look at these structural underpinnings. What is a fair livable wage? And how do you keep that up? The true cost of living measure should help us appreciate that. It should also help us appreciate what are those costs that are currently not being captured and what we as a city can do about them. And then what we as a nation can do about it.
That data will be incredibly powerful in being able to drive this conversation forward. Absolutely. And in talking a little bit about the other things that are not necessarily pay, we've heard through the report about the second shift. We've heard about the motherhood penalty. And Lorraine, I wanted to ask you a little bit about this because we haven't actually talked on the corporate side, and I know Catalyst works a lot with companies. So what can employers be doing to limit the effects or to take away that motherhood penalty that we see, and also to make changes to be more equitable?
Thank you for asking that question. And, Catalyst works with a lot of the larger organizations, and we've actually made a lot of progress in the large companies over the last 20 years or so in terms of their actual policies. And, and I think actually right now is a good time because companies are seeing that there's more women graduates, there's more women of color who are graduating, and they need to be able to service a more diverse workforce if they're going to attract and retain the talent they need to be competitive. So because of that, you've seen that they're implementing chief diversity offices, having a focus on building inclusive workplaces that gets at the biases that, you talked about it, that are fundamental. You see a change in paid family leave. When I entered the workplace, when I had my children, and this is true still in the federal government, that, all you had was illness, you had illness leave. Now, many of the large companies are offering 4 months, and they're offering 4 months as paid family leave, so both men and women can take that leave. And they're working towards a culture where men can take that time off. They're offering leaning into more flexibility. You see coming off of COVID for people who can have flexible work, that there is more flexibility. This is something that Catalyst has been driving for many, many years, but coming off of COVID, it's become the new norm for many people, that there is that flexibility. And that really helps women. It helps people have to care. It helps people have to take long commutes, and people with lower income, have these long commutes. We see much more focus on pay transparency and pay equity. So almost all, it's very interesting, over the last 5 years, we've gone from almost none of the large companies presenting pay data and doing pay equity studies to almost all of them. We just did a study, 93% of the Catalyst community is doing pay equity studies, and 71% are going and adjusting the pay, and they're doing that on a yearly basis. And they're also reporting EEO1 data and things like that. Now, that does not say that we are getting where we need to be, because we still have the men in investment banking and on the trading floor, and the women in doing the administrative work, or maybe doing the marketing work, even if they've got, but they're not getting paid at least a certain amount. But they are working on it. So I think that we've also seen more support for childcare, for temporary, for backup childcare, for maybe putting in childcare, supporting childcare services. So I think some of the large companies are really good models for where we need to go, because they do have more resources to do that, and they have this not only moral imperative, but this economic imperative to make sure that they're attracting and retaining the talent. We also have seen, we saw what happened with the UAW recently, we saw what happened with the Actors Union. It's because we're in full employment right now, and companies really have to do this. So it is an opportunity.
Let me just jump in here and say, you're spot on. We also have to always make sure that we are ever watchful for the consequences that are intended and the ones that are not intended. I'm hearing in conversations with many young persons, many more companies are now offering women storage, gestational egg storage. So you can put off having babies, right? And seriously, some of these big companies, and they're saying, we are here to support you. And what the growing concern now is, is that to put off my childbearing years so I can give you the best of my years energy-wise? No, it's sincerely. No. And so then, now I'm 45 and now I'm into, what can be a very challenging time in terms of, being pregnant and carrying children and the stresses on your body. So is this really about me? Or is it really about getting the most out of me in what you may deem my most productive years? And so what you're talking about is different, but we have to watch the consequences intended and the consequences unintended. What we think is good for us may sometimes be big company trying to, keep us in the game for as long as they can. It's happening, and they're talking about it.
Oh, that's interesting. I do want to comment, Lorraine, on these magnanimous large companies that are now reporting their equal pay data. That's because they have to. They have to. They have to do it. If you're an international company, you have to do that in Europe. And that's required, actually started, UK was requiring all companies 250 or over, have to every year, report their data and really show the spread of people across the company. So it's not just one number like we're talking about, and I think that has really made a difference. So, Coca-Cola, Citigroup, you sometimes read, well, they just haven't released their data, and it's because they have to.
Well,
So
let me
why
just
can't they
clarify
do that?
I just want to clarify. I mean, in the UK, it is mandated. In the EU, they're working on legislation to enable that. In the United States, it is not. We still have a lot of work to do in the United States. So if you take the big companies, they have, some of them, I've seen it, they report the UK, but they don't report the US. So, however, the reason why that's driving them being more transparent is that employees, especially Gen Z and millennials, are demanding it. Just like the pay ranges, just like the fact that you can't, you don't have to disclose what you previously paid. They're demanding that. Investors are demanding this as well, and their consumers are demanding it. You see how much focus the consumers are having that are affecting a lot of companies. You see what happened with Disney, you see what happened with Bud Light, all this type of stuff. So I just want to say that we need to really continue legislation, because in Europe, and there's a report that King's College did, the legislation that they've put in the places they've put it in has moved the needle. So we have to continue to do what New York City is doing, even more to require them to do that. And that is not happening at the federal level yet.
No, it's not, but I can tell you that I think, this will be a campaign that Power moves forward in the next year, because if we don't have businesses really taking this seriously, they have to do pay audits. And I think actually one of the things the city could do is they can help smaller companies. Big companies, they have HR departments, but the smaller, medium-sized companies, they're on their own with some of this. But I think that, the city could take a role in helping companies really look at their data. You're supposed to look at your data, right? You're supposed to look at your numbers before you put a salary range down. So we really do need to help companies move along. And we really believe that some of this should be required, not just, voluntarily.
I think that would be a fairly light lift thing to do. And I think we should write that down, because
that was one of my suggestions.
To have some tools that enable. I know I'm an employer of 130, a small organization, and it is hard to get all that data and do it, and also get the IDing of the information and doing it right and sharing all that. That could make a big difference.
Right. I'll just add that, we're going to piggyback, and Michelle spoke to this. The city could also begin by using the data that it actually has and paying human service workers under contract with the City of New York fair wages. How is it that in fiscal year 2024's budget, we had significant dollars added for municipal workers, many of them doing the very same jobs as nonprofit workers in human service agencies under contract with the City of New York, but somehow the City of New York could not find the money to pay a bare COLA? Now, we need more than a COLA, but we've got majority Black and brown workers, as Michelle said, in nonprofit agencies under contract with the City of New York, 60% of them eligible for the same income supports that they are helping people in the communities to apply for and receive. And yet the city could not find, we're talking about just, a few $100 million compared to the billions they put into labor contracts. They could not find it to bring the wages up for these women and these men. That's where we begin.
Yeah. Jennifer, you're on fire.
These topics, because we know the answers. The truth is we know what need be done. And I'm so thankful that you created this report because it just provides more data. But what is the data if it isn't used?
Right, exactly. And it's very interesting to hear and to talk about how we work within companies, with government, with policies, with nonprofits and philanthropy to bring all of this together. We're basically out of time because we're going to go into Q&A, but I want to ask one question of all of you. It could be either a piece of advice you leave with the audience or a call to action that you want people to take. So Camille, do you want to start with you?
So I want to come back to the importance of our electoral power. I think Bev mentioned earlier just even the transformation of our city council to be majority women at this time and how powerful that is, because all of a sudden issues that, as Jennifer has mentioned, have been issues for years, for decades. I think people who are directly impacted by those issues, name those issues, bring that to the floor. And I think we need to see that transformation not only in city council, but in all levels of government. I also think that we need to seek out our leaders from all different types of communities and places. I mean, so many dynamic leaders who are leading movements right now, so many leaders, for example, who, when we talk about the Fund for Excluded Workers, many of them were Black and brown immigrant women who were fighting for that. And so we need to look to those women as well within movement building spaces, as well as electoral politics, to be leading these conversations as well.
Very true.
Well, I'd just like to double down on this transparency and measurement and also go to this issue of, what they're doing in Europe, which is to look at value, not just pay equity.
right.
And if we could get the right measurements on that and get everyone reporting on that, it would start to bring light on this issue we have on gender on wage segregation, as well as really showing where we have the issues so that just showing the data makes a difference, because then the employees and their customers can see what it is. So, measurement and helping people measure effectively on the right measures is something I think is very doable that the city could lead in.
And I think combining kind of what Bev said earlier around political engagement and also what Camille said, I think is really important. It's not just political engagement, but it's joining movements. We at HSC with our partner organizations, including FPWA, created the Just Pay campaign to focus on a single issue and build power around that. There's a lot of issues in the nonprofit sector, but workforce wages are the #1 issue. So it's like, how do we have a rallying cry? And to Jennifer's point, last year, there were 12 union agreements that were included in the budget and 40 million total for human services workers. There's over 85,000 human services workers. I think we can leave the ... as to why there were 12 union agreements and not much for human services workers. And so we have to sit in our own power. And the only way to do that is to join movements, whether it's childcare workers, the home care movement, those kind of movements are really important. And we're also recognizing the power that we bring to those conversations. And I also think, especially as we are hearing about the austerity budgets, right? Like we're kind of manifesting it by believing it, right? the city receipts and the state receipts are not terrible, but we're looking at kind of an austerity budget and we must make cuts. First, again, it's a little like showing up in a Ferrari and saying there's no money for groceries, right? Like, you spent the money and now there's a reckoning for it. And we have to join together. And I think this report really helps that, to clarify that there are policies that we can't let go of, and we can't allow ourselves to say, you must choose between childcare and seniors. You must choose between X and Y. There is enough money for all of those things. And it will take, us not fighting for scraps that I think will be really important in the coming year.
So I'm going to, we're going to switch here because I don't want to follow her. And also, I think you'll build on my points. So it's all connected. All of these issues are connected, and that's why Power New York brings together, organizations and people who are involved in different issues. Childcare, you can't have a thrive in your job if you don't have childcare, right? And you can't thrive in your job if you're not safe at home or at work. And what about reproductive rights? How's that connected? Well, what about if I don't want to have children, or I do want to have children, or I want to put it off? These are all connected. Our lives are all connected. So I just want to stress that that's really what we're talking about. And when you connect all of that, think about the power that we have. We can be a force for change if we work together. And I'm so thrilled to work with Women Creating Change, because you have such a wonderful network of action-oriented people. And there's so much that we can do together. One of the things we have to do is we have to improve the salary transparency law. It's not good enough. You can't let companies get away with these huge ranges. You have to, employees that are working now, don't they deserve to know where they are, where they stand in their companies? And what about compensation, like bonuses and all these other forms of compensation? So we want to add that to the New York City law first, because New York City leads, and then the state follows. And that's just how, that's what's happened. And we want to add that. So we want to improve that law. And so I think that's an action that Women Creating Change can share with their large group of people, because I can't tell you how hard it was to get done what we did we did accomplish with the salary transparency law. There was a huge pushback. I mean, business just came out in force, but now they're seeing that this is good for them. 70% say, I'm getting better quality candidates for my jobs. So I think there are specific things that we can do, and then we'll hear about that. Power wants to look at these other two issues that came up, which is equal pay for work of equal value, but also, really making companies report on what they're doing, how they're paying contractors. Is our federal, state and city money going to contractors who are actually following equal pay laws, who are actually giving women jobs in the infrastructure, with all that infrastructure money? Women should be getting 50% of those jobs and the apprenticeships, because that's how we're going to get them into higher paying jobs. Care jobs are better jobs, I think. But we also have to get women into higher paying jobs as well. So there's so much we can do if we mobilize, if we work together, and if we respond, to these opportunities to really move the ball, to change the laws, so that we really can address, what Jennifer, you talked about, which is racism, sexism, ableism, disabilities, So I'm really looking forward to sending those action steps to you, Sharon, wherever I can't see you, and having, so we can really make a lot of noise in 2024, so.
It was her idea, not my idea. Everything. I agree with all that has been presented here this morning. For me, it's us always remembering that we have to center on the both and. And so that the programmatic, the policy responses, and the structural underpinnings. We so often in our work, and I'm not accusing anybody on this panel of this, but so often we apply Band-Aid responses. We don't root out, we don't weed out the structural underpinnings of the challenges that we have. we engage in, well, this looks like, a good measure. I was a big fan of the expansion of the child tax credit. I was not a fan of everybody saying that it reduced poverty, by nearly half, because it didn't. When you undercount what is actually needed for people to live in America, you're not really, essentially reducing poverty. You've just given some help, some support that maybe helps people get along or get by, but you're not actually helping people get ahead. So I think it's the both and being ever mindful, each and every one of us as we do this work. Are we addressing the why? Why we need these policies, these programs, this legislation in the first place, and what more we should be doing? I'll quickly share. In 2009, had a life-threatening illness. I woke up with a flu-like fever, and the next week I was in a coma, intubated, and the doctors were telling my husband that I was going to die in 48 hours. They said that I had leukemia. They told me that I would not survive. The doctors decided nonetheless to give me chemotherapy. They treated the cancer. I survived that weekend. But then I learned that I was only going to survive the disease long term if I had a bone marrow transplant. There was treatment, chemotherapy. There was a cure, bone marrow transplant. They got to the root of the problem. I ultimately received a transplant. And that's why, now it's how many years? 14, going on 15 years later, that I'm cancer free. That I don't have chemotherapy or anything. But the point is, they went to the root of the problem. I had a broken blood and bone marrow system. So they cured the problem. They didn't just treat it with chemotherapy. When we do this work here, we're engaged mainly in treating problems. We don't center on the whys, the root causes, and rooting that out. It's a both and approach we have to take.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. We have to open our eyes, see the root cause, electoral power, political engagement, transparency and measurement, and understanding the value so that we can do equal pay for equal value. So that's kind of what I took from this. I have one question from the audience, and we have a few minutes. So let me start with this one. Okay. We'll start with the online one, and if anyone has questions, please raise your hand. Christy will hand you the mic. How does this pay equity and career growth show up in city government when lower levels of the workforce are Black women, especially in public health? Who wants to take that?
There's local law 18 requires the city to look at the data Local law 18, which CWA Local 1180 was able to get pushed forward. It requires the city to collect all this data about the workforce. The question is, what are they doing with the data? So that's one thing that really has to be done. Don't just collect it, you have to use it. And so every department should be charged with looking at their employment practices, who's in what job, and creating, a real change, creating a plan for change. So we took a step. New York City is extraordinary in having taken that step, but the next step is looking at who's doing the job and what are they being paid for. And what we found, and it's very clear, is that women and people of color are at the bottom half. So now, what are you going to do about it? And that should be the charge of every agency. And if they can't do it, then they shouldn't be running an agency, because that has to be done.
So I'm just going to add, it will be the charge. I'm going to make sure of it. Jimmy Pan is going to make sure of it. The Commission on Racial Equity, now headed by Linda Tijani, we're going to make sure of it. There is now a mandate in the New York City Charter, again, brought about by the Racial Justice Commission and the New York City electorate voting for it, that we establish an Office of Racial Equity and require every city agency, every mayoral office to be responsible and accountable for bringing about equity in hiring practice, in staffing. We found when we were doing the work and we were talking to New Yorkers across the city, there were many persons who came forward, people of color, and particularly women, who talked about being in jobs where they were being denied opportunities to advance with respect to promotions in city government in 2021. We heard about people, and there was actually a lawsuit at the time that was settled, where we had workers in New York City government in DCAS who were, Black workers who were being denied opportunities for overtime. It's happening right now, but there's now a constitutional mandate that this shall be no more. And New York City is going to hold city government accountable.
Thank you. I saw Mike over there.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for the inspiring panel. I'm curious to hear more about the vision for change, and to me, something that's standing out is the idea of how do we get through, some sort of unique taxation policy. I mean, a bold one that probably isn't going to pass. How do we get major income transfer from the private sector to human services and childcare services? And I'm just curious if there are any other big, bold ideas in that frame that you could share.
So I'm happy to start. I think first there's a really great statewide campaign called Invest in Our New York that really much smarter than me. There's all these kind of like tax loopholes and things like that. And I think that that's a really important campaign for both the city, at the state level to push. We've obviously heard from the federal level that the Trump era tax cuts are responsible for something like 50% of our, current debt. Nobody quote me on that. I just read a headline. So, that I think you're right in terms of like, there has to be a revenue conversation, and HSC, my organization is part of the Invest in Our New York campaign because it's a really important campaign to talk about, they have a list of like 10 things around where money is removed from the system and not invested in communities. I also think that the legalization of cannabis is a really important conversation, and where that revenue goes. I think the law is written in a smart way to make sure it has justice-centered people involved in the creation of those shops and industry, but where is that revenue going to go? And it should go to human services. And because it's, social services has not ever had its own revenue stream. And so I think that that's another component of this. So there has to be a revenue conversation around taxation. I think the Invest in Our New York campaign has done a great job of that, and we are a supporter of that. But I also think that especially in the upcoming year, revenue will be a really important conversation. We have to close a lot of those tax loopholes. And then we also have to think about where we're investing funding. And I think when the city government has announced 15% pegs across the board that they're looking to enact, those are the kind of conversations that make us really worried. And we don't want to just look to revenue, but also to ask, our city government to make better choices about like where those, where money that's currently in the system is being spent, and it should be spent on human services. And I think going back to the last point, city government workers are paid 30% more than human services workers and nonprofits on average. And we're also the training ground for city workers. And so by not paying human services workers, they've actually cut off their own supply to have talented workers. And so I think, the revenue conversation is so important because it talks about that trickle down and root cause effect to Jennifer in a very different way than what Jennifer is bringing up. But this idea of like, we've starved the system and now we're like, oh, well, there's no money. Well, there is money if we went back and looked at those kind of things. So I can't recommend them enough in terms of looking at, they have a really great menu of options for lifting revenue across the state and in New York City.
One last question, yeah.
Hi, thank you for a great panel. I was curious about what are the resources that are out there for women who are currently fighting in their workplace with misogyny and misnomer and the microaggressions that we all face in the workplace? What are the things that are resources for those women to help them stay strong and push back successfully in a way that is not economically damaging to them?
So I can speak to just some examples of organizations that I know currently exist in New York City. For example, you have groups like Latino Justice that works primarily with Latinx workers, particularly in low-wage work and care industry, et cetera, and have provided supportive legal counseling and other supports to women who are experiencing harassment, as well as being paid low wage or unequal pay. And so they've provided legal support. And I think there are a number of organizations that are out there currently that are working with a variety variety of communities in different sectors that offer legal support, offer, in addition, mental health and trauma-informed support services to find other workforce industries to go into, or how to skill up in different areas. So there are a number of organizations that currently exist that do that work and are available to folks.
Do I have to stand up? All right. I was just trying to formulate my question, but so when we talk about gender inequalities, there's often a comparison between white men and everybody else, as far as white men and race and like white women and Black women. But how does that compare to white women and Black men? And does anyone have any insights on that? Because I know racism plays an effect in everything. So my guess would be white women get paid more than Black men. And so often with these talks, I often feel like, as far as with the Black community, I'm like, how does that affect my community as a whole? And where do they get lost or not talked about in this conversation?
So I'm not aware of the current data, but I have seen data in years past that showed that, Black men on average make less than white men, and that white women in many instances, and again, it goes based on profession, make less than Black men, but not necessarily significantly less. The factor that we have to incorporate when we think about this is the often not talked about differential is that even if white women are making less, they are most often not the majority the breadwinner in the households, in the majority of white households. So in white households, you more often have two incomes, whereas in Black households, you have just majority one income. So, regardless of how much the Black man is making in comparison to the white woman, that white woman has that white man's income to hold the family up. So that's the other thing. You raise a very good point, but it has to actually be looked at in the entire context. The reason why we see less than 1 in 10 white children living in poverty is that even with white women's wages not being, comparable or at the same level of white men's wages on average, is because her children also have the benefit of the white man in the household, his income. And we can get into why the Black man is not in the household, but I mean, that's a whole other conversation that is steeped in structural economic deprivation.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to catch a plane.
Well, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. So we just want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. As you can see, we still have a lot of work to do. At WCC, our goal, as I mentioned before, is to really educate, equip, provide resources, tools, connections to be able to advocate for women, for communities, and for a better quality of life in New York City. And so it's really important that we provide you with these resources. So on that note, check out our Civic Matters Hub. It has resources. You heard a lot about the campaigns that's happening around. We want to be able to inform those campaigns, right? And to really activate your voices. So that's really important. Secondly, I do want to say thank you to our staff, Anya, Anita, and our consultants, the ANAT team, and Christy and others, our volunteers who are here today to make this day special for you. Third, I want to also thank our volunteers who gave of their time to be here with us today. So again, you heard we have a lot of work to do. Please get involved. Please share this information, read the report. We also will be able to come out to your community and share this information. So if you need to have us come and do the presentation for you, please reach out to me or any members of my team. Again, thank you for being here today. Thank you for this lively conversation. We still have a lot of work to do. It's a run, not a sprint. So let's get started, all right? Or continue. Thank you.